Now, you may have noticed the American twang when visiting holiday spots over the festive season, right? Well, it would seem that more Americans are visiting our shores now, and they are overtaking the number of UK and German tourists. But for more on this, we're joined by tourism expert Gillian Saunders joins us now to give us a picture and an understanding of why we're seeing this trend. Gillian, good to have you, and good morning to you. It seems that our American counterparts are enjoying South Africa, most of the bookings being accounted for by American tourists. What are the numbers saying, especially when we compare them to German and British tourists?
Hi, good morning, Tumelo, and thank you for having me on the program. Well, yes, right now, if you look at November year to date for 2021, we had more American tourists than we did German or UK tourists. Those are our three biggest tourist-generating countries normally. So the UK, we saw 71,000 visitors from the UK. And only 34,000 from the, 34,000 from the UK only, while we had 72,000 from the USA. And Germany was even lower, 38,000. But the picture really is dependent on the travel bans and the different attitudes of different governments around the world to travel. So if we actually look in November, the month of November, when pretty much travel was free to South Africa. We'd come off the Delta variant wave where we'd been banned actually based on beta, but nevertheless we were unbanned in September more or less. And so in September arrivals were still pretty low. In October, for instance, the UK arrivals grew from 460 in September to 6,000, nearly 6,700 in October, which was a whopping 1,300 and something % increase. And it continued with another 69% increase to November. So actually the UK is growing very fast. And in November, we had more UK arrivals than we had USA arrivals. And actually Germans were the best. We had nearly 13,000 German arrivals in November. So what we're seeing is as the world opened up, the trends are going back to our normal mix of tourists. But of course, then Omicron hit and we were closed down for all of December and still most of January.
Absolutely. And speaking of, the cause of these numbers that we're seeing here, you mentioned the travel ban, mentioned obviously some of the flights, being suspended, but also fear. Did fear contribute to these numbers as well in terms of some tourists not coming? Because even though we did open up, are we saying that some people are quick to jump on a plane, or were they a bit hesitant from visiting South Africa?
I think fear was not as big a factor as the fact of the quarantine requirements, the hotel quarantine requirements, the lack of flights. I think had there been more openness in terms of travel bans and restrictions, we would have got to the point where the number of people who wanted to come, who were not fearful, was sort of topping out. And then it would have been a confidence building requirement to get the rest of the tourists to come. So yes, there are some people who are concerned about travel. And, in the same ways they might be shielding in their home environment and their lives at home, they would not consider traveling for quite a while until they felt the world was really out of the pandemic. But there were still plenty of people who showed a huge interest in traveling to this country, especially actually the UK, because the UK have got a lot of family ties. We have visitors, friends and relatives. We have more of what we call swallows from the UK, people who come here for a whole 3 or 4 months in summer, almost like a second home that they live in, whereas the USA is a little bit smaller in those markets.
Yeah, and you mentioned a good point, because, when we talk about the UK, we're talking about South Africa's traditional, main source market here, particularly in tourism. So how did that impact the tourism industry, so to speak?
That one was a horrific impact on the industry. I think the UK had some of the strictest bans through the sort of beginning with beta, but carrying on through the Delta wave. And then again with Omicron, they were the very first country on the day we had the press conference to block us totally again. And that's had a detrimental effect. We normally have 430,000 British tourists a year. Their worth, I think, is about 38 billion, if I remember correctly, to our economy each year. And so those links being cut, it's not just the travel for holiday and for leisure as well. It's, it's the family visits for weddings and children and all of that type of thing that people could no longer do. I knew many people when those bans came in November that were actually in tears over a family who couldn't come here or visits they couldn't give, they couldn't go to the UK for. So there was a massive impact there. But the other one that people forget about is trade and investment as well.
Right.
And what people are saying is the trade and investment links that global travel enables, and the conferences and the exhibitions that support that. Even knowledge dissemination is supported by conferences and exhibitions in the academic and research arenas. And this all is effective.
Yeah, and then just before I let you go then, Gillian, are we seeing a pickup just economically in terms of those bookings? Generally, besides obviously the majority of them being accounted for by American tourists, but is South Africa picking up from such a dire situation in the previous months?
We're picking up again. Luckily, I mean, yesterday only the UAE opened to us again. Whereas other countries since November the 28th, I think it was the 28th, have slowly been reopening from, again, led by the UK on the 19th of December. But the reopenings have come at a much slower pace than the closures came. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of what let's call it our discretionary foreign independent and group tourists through the summer season. Some of the big group tour operators into South Africa, when the bans happened in November, cancelled for a whole 3 months. They said they cannot risk holding some of the tours on their books. They cancelled through till March, and they were going to reopen only in March. And so that was gone. And people who were more or less risk averse, and particularly families who wanted to visit each other, once the bans were lifted, that was the type of visitors that we saw picking up and getting on the planes. And then slowly the independent tourists are now coming back as well.
Well, Gillian, thank you so much for, just highlighting this issue for us and also just painting that picture of how it looked then, how it looks now, and hopefully it continues to progress. Gillian Saunders, tourism expert, thank you for your time this morning.